Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Welcome everyone to Application Security Weekly, episode number 20. It will be one of your hosts today. Keith Hoodlet is out this week, but none other than Michael Santarcangelo on the lines via Skype will be joining us today. Michael, welcome.
Do you remember the days when you couldn't say my last name?
Remember that?
And now, like, you probably have nightmares saying it.
I said it so many times. I correct people now that it's Michael, it's not Mike. I'm like, it's Santarcangelo, okay? Like, get it right.
It'll make everything easier. Hey, it's exciting. I feel like I haven't seen you for like 2 full hours.
Right?
So
we did Business Security Weekly. Sandy Dunn, which was a great interview. And she mentioned topics relevant to this show, right? She mentioned the Phoenix Project and beyond the Phoenix Project. And how those have helped her in her career, which as a CISO, which I think is great.
And talked about shifting left and
Yes.
a lot of stuff. I mean, it was packed with it. I'll tell you too, looking at some of the stories that we get to talk about, we've got an interview coming up on Business Security Weekly within the month, which is going to look at some of these issues. We've got a professor from Boston University looking at cryptography, the technical limitations and the technical opportunities, things that we can do that some people say, oh, that's not possible. They've actually devised a method to make some of these things possible using crypto. Now, whether or not we should or shouldn't do it, whether or not it's feasible, those are different discussions, and we're gonna have some of that conversation. So that's I love it when everything kind of fits together. You probably feel that way. Do you sit at home at night, Paul, and like bridge your fingers together and say, yes, it's all working?
Yeah, sometimes I don't know. I tend to get focused on a particular show, and I don't, believe it or not, I don't often think about the content and how it kind of flows between the shows. I think you're really into that, Michael, in terms of like some themes that we've had across the shows. So we probably need to exploit that.
I do. I came up through this field in a very creative journalist sort of way. In the years I spent teaching the CISSP really forced me to be with groups of people and be able to connect whatever we're talking about here to whatever we're talking about here. And I've kind of found that, you and I had this conversation on Business Security Weekly, and then we had it after Business Security Weekly. So we'll rehash parts of it for people here. What I'm excited about in security is that things are shifting. Like we talk about DevOps and the need to integrate with people now. And we talk about the need to go understand the business. A lot of the clients I work with on the enterprise side will commonly voice, okay, we get it now. We need to go support the business, right? Sandy talked about that on Business Security Weekly today. Well, that means we have to understand what's important to them, not just their needs, but also their desires and their experiences and what they want. And for a lot of us, that's kind of a new way of looking at it. So for me, I enjoy looking at where this intersects with policy or where these different things happen. And I'm always going to look at it from the perspective of, but how big a deal is it? And if I was going to sit and talk with somebody in the executive suite or somebody at corporate counsel, what do I think they actually need to know about it? And I always think that type of stuff is relevant, especially with application security, because this is the frontier right now for a lot of what we're doing in security. And as our stories point out, there's stuff that's still happening that we could pat ourselves in the back and say, well, that's never going to happen. Oh, look, it just happened again.
Oh yeah, I think story number 2 into bugs, breaches, and more is the shining example of that, Michael.
Yeah, right. So, I think you set it up really well when we talked about this right before we came on, right? So Microsoft Windows remote kernel crash vulnerability. And I like the way you put it out. Look, everybody knows that Microsoft has an exceptionally robust process for this. They've spent, I don't even know how much money, but lots of money over the better part of a decade to really invigorate trustworthy computing. Mm-hmm. They are a large organization with some of the smartest people on the planet looking at this stuff all the time. And, PS, an old code base that has been reviewed, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of times, if not more.
Dude. Like, I remember talking to, I think many of them have their own shining careers in many startups, right? But, you know, a lot of people in the early days got called into Microsoft that were working at Stake at the time, maybe other, some of those early companies. Microsoft called them in to review the code. And Microsoft also, as we've learned recently, has their own now official red team that's only been around a couple of years, but there was an individual who kind of spearheaded that effort. So, and they've got bug bounty programs. I mean, Microsoft is like very conscious of the quality and security of their code. Now, on the flip side, they also probably have arguably the most lines of code and software to defend on the planet, and the most widely adopted software, I would argue, as well. Which, you know, when we find a remote kernel crash vulnerability, two things, right? We're surprised that Microsoft has allowed this to happen, right? Because they have great processes. But also they've got, since it's the most widely deployed, they've got the most people looking for these vulnerabilities as well. And where I kind of went with this in an application security context is when we talk about these new development strategies and delivery methods and how resilient our code can be before it hits production, right? I mean, we saw that with Netflix and CodeMonkey and all that stuff. We're seeing that in the development process with Agile, with I write the test for that bug first, and then I go fix the bug, then test-driven development that we've talked about here in the show. And I think some developers come around and like, oh, we don't really like need a whole bunch of QA anymore, do we? Really? And I'm like, no, like here's a good example of why you still need QA and multiple programs that are trying to find vulnerabilities in your code before they reach production, and some of them after, just because this stuff happens, because we're implementing very complex systems. And while you think your agile development method may remove all the bugs before you move to production, that's very difficult. That's very difficult, if not impossible, to do in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, you know, you said something here too that I think is important to take a look at, because, you know, I've always looked at, for example, bug bounties. I'm a fan of them, but in me, it's really just on-spec testing and validation, and which means, you know, you're doing the work, and if you find something, you get paid for it. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, as an economist, I kind of like the model and the concept of it. But what we're seeing now with companies like Microsoft and others is they have an internal bug bounty program, they have an external bug bounty program, they have an internal QA team, they have an internal red team, they have all sorts of different layers. And I think that's the key to this, is that it's challenge. I wish I could cite where exactly I heard this. It was in the rounds of teaching, and somebody once explained to me that they took a software engineering class, and the class was split into two halves. And depending on which half you were, you had to either write code or you had to try to find problems in the code. And they restricted it. It was like 1,000 lines, 5,000 lines. It was something not insignificant, but also not even remotely compared to what we have today. And you had to write a backdoor into it. That was the first half of the class. Then you exchanged the code with the other half. And in the second half of the class, you had to try to find it. And they said, look, almost always knowing there was a problem, knowing that our success depended on us finding the problem in something, a fairly terminal set of code. Yeah, more times than not they couldn't. And that was actually the point, was to say, look, it's easy to say, it's harder to do, but I'm really enjoying those nested models of let's keep looking at it in a lot of different ways. So I like it. That's pretty much all we can do, right? I mean, we can try to write better and think about it better, but the way that the code gets translated and executed on the actual chips, there's going to keep being problems, I think.
What's interesting is my friend Dave, who we're going to bring on the show. He's a member of my extended family, and one of the few that actually does software and technology, and he's awesome. And I was talking to him Saturday night, and I'm like, dude, you totally have to come on the show. I'm like, the conversations we've had, I'm like, I've used what we talked about on the show, and I'm like, I've given you credit, and you haven't come on the show, so people don't know who you are, you know, of our listeners. And I'm like, so you got, and he agreed that he's going to get scheduled and come on the show. And what recently, and very briefly, we had a conversation because our family gets kind of tired if we just sit there and nerd out the entire time. And like, my kids need stuff, and I'll be right there. Dave and I are talking, and Dave said, you know, QA needs to start writing code. He's like, I firmly believe that if you're in QA today, you got to start writing these tests. Like, QA role has evolved to not just finding problems, but writing scripts or software to go automate the discovery of problems. And He's like, I think if you're thinking you're going to be in QA and you're not going to be a developer, you're probably not going to have a job in the next couple of years, maybe even today. I mean, he was really like backed up his point, like, no, they need to be developers. And I thought, you know, especially with just this one story we've talked about.
That's a great point.
It's kind of interesting, right?
Well, so let me ask you this question, because I've always found that when you're on a large project doing custom code or implementation, when you're trying to do QA, you're trying to show whoever's paying for it that you're actually achieving the functionality that they asked for. They're not so interested in you showing them all the bad stuff that can happen and all the things you can't do.
It's very true.
Because that's time and that's money, right? So most of the QA, most of the testing that we see in most organizations today is bent on, here's my script, here's my test, does it meet these objectives? Does it do this properly?
Functional requirements, right? The QA largely tests against functional requirements.
So how do we shift that mindset so that we start looking, and what's the right level? In fact, this might be a bad segue, but I think it's along the lines of, and you and I have talked to people over the years looking at threat mapping and different ways to be able to do this, right? So there's this article, want to break into a locked Windows 10 device, ask Cortana. Now, it's kind of heady, like when you look at it, like the way they broke it down. I like it. It's all good. But there's a piece of me saying, okay, hold on though, right? Because when they were building this, what they're saying is the world is moving toward more voice interaction, and it's in our interest to be able to do that. Now, just the complete complexity to do that is staggering. And I've got to think that even at Microsoft, they've released their threat models and all sorts of stuff, that this either represents the challenge of threat modeling and acting on the data, or that when they threat modeled it, this was one of those branches off to the side that they went, oh, that's not likely.
Yeah, or they never discovered that branch, right? And that's exactly where I would have went, is threat modeling in this scenario, right, Michael? Even if Microsoft has literally defined a standard for threat modeling. There's multiple that exist, but arguably one of the more popular ones comes from Microsoft. And here's a clear case where did they take that, like you said, did they take that into account for their threat modeling? And
I think doesn't it start to show us too, Paul, that the threat modeling at some level still is interpreted by people. So someone's got to look at that whole range of threats. And if I've got to ship a product, right? And so this is my application security angle to it. I've got to ship a product. The way that we're going to make money and keep everybody employed and maybe advance civilization, if you want, is that this product ships. And you're going to give me a threat model and say, okay, but here's 99 things you got to fix, right? Yeah. No, I don't have time for all of those, or I don't know how to prioritize it. So let's go back then to talking about testing. Do you have advice, or is this something we need to look at better as an industry to say, how do we get some threat modeling into our QA process? Do we test against the top 5? Do we pick a random one? Have you seen anybody do this part well, and you think it's a model we should emulate? And I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, no, but I think it's interesting that we include QA in that threat modeling process. And I'd actually be interested of companies that do threat modeling and believe it's successful or maybe has value, right? If you get some value out of threat modeling, what are you including from QA? Like, who are you including? How often? How are you incorporating QA in your threat modeling? Are you incorporating someone from security in your threat modeling? If you're in security, you got too many applications and development teams, security can't be involved in everything. Are you training your developers and your QA folks and your architects, right? That could be another role in threat modeling, and how are you training them on that threat modeling?
And then I didn't hear you mention the business analysts, but we probably need to throw them back into the loop too.
Sure. People up front. You know, and I think that some of it comes down to project management, product management as well. And more so, I think, to establish priority. And I think, it ties into one of my stories that I didn't get to in depth. It was a survey by CA, Securing DevOps Without Undermining It. And what it reminded me of is the control and responsibility that we have when we release software that we have. We determine, the team collectively should be determining, and I'm sure that varies per organization, but development, QA, architects, project managers, even senior management, right? You're getting involved in a lot of the decisions that says what holds up a build, what holds up an internal release to QA, to user acceptance training. And then the big one is, as you started to point out, Michael, and talk about when you're ready to ship, like what holds up a release and what doesn't. And those are, as I've been kind of talking about recently, those are performance things. Those could be just general functional bugs. Those could be extreme use cases. Those could be security vulnerability. It's all this has to be prioritized. And I think when we talk about not undermining DevOps with security, we're really talking about identification and prioritization of bugs and making that those hard decisions. Those of us that have been in the software development process, no, those are hard decisions. And there's often a lot of heated meetings to talk about what's going to hold up a release and what is it. And a lot of that is talking about features, maybe some bug fixes, also needs to include security, performance, and other types of potential bugs as well.
And I'm going to add two elements to that I'd like to see more often. First of which then is, what's your tolerance for threat, right? What's your risk appetite or your temperature? Because I think that drives it. I've obviously glossed over the ability to properly classify stuff, but assume we can get that right. The second piece to it then, and you and I have talked about this a little bit over the years, how much of this can we push back to the developers? I mean, part of what I like about the promise of DevOps and these agile methods is I like faster, short, focused cycles. I like looking at something like that. But then I don't think that those folks need to wait on security to come back and do something, because to your point, if QA is more and more going to require developers, and we keep seeing the similar types of things, right? I feel like we interviewed somebody somewhere along the line, and they said, look, if we look at all the CVE stuff, it really comes down to like these 5 categories are all that matters. Awesome. So what are we doing to advance that, push that power back to a developer in the moment so they can look at something and go, oops, I can make a tweak here, where it's easy for them. They're still in that flow state. It makes a lot of sense. And all we have to do from a security perspective is make sure that those things were done. I think that's where we get a lot of that. So I like that. I mean, securing it without undermining it is good. I just think the answer then is, so know what your appetite is and push power back to people that are able to act on it in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to, point to a list like the OWASP top 10 and say, well, none of these classes of vulnerability should ever be in any of our applications. Like it's just not feasible, right? And to your point, Michael, it needs to be part of a threat model and a risk model of what your tolerance is. Maybe in that internal application, we can afford to release, even an internal release before we fix that and go back. But other applications, maybe not. So I think much in the way of vulnerability management on the patching side and configuration side of your IT operations, software is the same thing. What's your tolerance? We're never going to fix every single bug that's ever going to be introduced into software, but what's our tolerance? And that could vary per application, just like in patching. It's going to vary maybe which group you're deploying patches to. And
it might change as our threat landscape changes and as those things change. And what I find is, it's one of those things where you go, but frankly, go ask somebody, so what's our threat tolerance or what's our risk tolerance? I don't find a lot of people know how to articulate that. I think it's an area that if we spend some time on it, we'll get better as a result.
Where do we want to go next? PGP Bug we were talking about as it relates to developers.
I wanted to point something out on this, and let me just get your take on it, because I see this sometimes, right? We come out and say, oh, well, that's it. PGP's undermined. It's all done from here. And I look at it and I go, wait, hold on. So you mean it's not actually, if you implement this the way it was written, you're good. But if you go and you turn on verbose mode, which is designed to troubleshoot bugs or unexpected behavior, then you run into this particular problem if you're in that mode and someone can bubble. And so it's kind of like one of those, right? So how likely is this? And what at least this article comes out and says, look, nothing ships that way by default. But then it says there's a couple of recommended configurations that then say, by the way, you should turn it on. So is this a problem in the code base itself, or the problem in somebody running code base in a verbose, in a debug, in a troubleshooting mode, and then getting shot in the foot for doing that?
Yeah, and that's a really common theme that we see in the term of security vulnerabilities, where a good number of them stem from is cases like this, where you've left in some kind of debug, you've left in some kind of backdoor, you've left in something that you maybe consciously or subconsciously were like, yeah, this could introduce security vulnerabilities, but we need it for testing, we need it for support, we need it for debugging, and oops, we forgot and we left it turned on and we pushed to production. This is something that very easily, I believe, is fixed in the continuous development model and in DevOps if you implement it correctly.
Yeah, I agree. And I also look at it and I go, hold on though. Most everything getting shipped does not have this on. This is a user goes in and flips it on by themselves, flips on verbose mode. mean, I don't know. Like, I get it. It's a bug. Okay, cool. But like, does this mean now all hope is lost and we can't trust PGP?
No.
I don't know. I didn't see it that way. And
No,
I think that's worth noting. But then to your point, I guess it's worth noting to say, what do you actually need to test it versus what's realistic versus what, again, right? It's almost like we've got to learn how to threat model. Well, if I leave this in, what could happen? So I thought it was interesting.
Well, that was interesting because it's a user that can actually flip it on. And I guess the development thing is like, how much flexibility do you want to give to your users?
Right.
And if you do, how do you let them do that securely? Because typically turning on these debug modes could have potential security implications and performance implications too. I mean, a lot of products that I'm sure, Mike, you've been in this industry for a long time. You see products that like, they don't let you do that stuff unless you get their permission or unless you're working with their support department directly, mostly because the user can do bad things potentially with that feature. Yeah,
and I just want to point out sometimes that user is us, right? Yeah. Because we think we know better or we think we understand it. And so it's an interesting thing because if you think about, because I've always been fascinated with PGP, and yet getting it to work on any sort of consistent scale is equally maddening. Yeah. So I get it. I get why you have overboost mode, especially given the licensing and the nature of PGP in particular, or GPG or any of them. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And so that's got to be the trade-off too. If you're creating something and you don't want to be the only person supporting it, or you don't see that being a feasible model, okay, then you have to create some of these opportunities for other people to figure it out, which now create new attack vectors. I think that's kind of interesting. Let's shift to this one. I'm kind of curious your take on it from an application security perspective. So Spain's La Liga app caught using the fans' phone mics and GPS to detect illegal football broadcasts. So basically, they put it out on the Android, on the Google Play, and you loaded it up. And what would happen is you basically gave them permission to fix your location and to turn on your mic for random samples of sound. Now, this typically irritates people when this happens, but what they were specifically looking for were bars and other places that were illegally showing the game to the loss of 150 million pounds. So it's a substantial problem for them to solve. But of course, once people figured that out, they went, whoa, wait a minute. You've turned me into a snitch? What? Yeah, exactly. That's not what I gave you permission to do. Nice. And I kind of looked at it on one hand and said, wait a minute now. I'll be clear. I think it's a clever way to solve the problem. I saw it in Batman already, so it's not a new way to solve the problem. But it's clever. And then I wonder, how many people, when they give, right here, when signing up for the app, users are presented with two tick boxes, one to confirm that they've read the app's terms and conditions, and the second one says, protect your team and help us because I want to use the data through your mic and GPS to detect illegal match broadcasts. It says that right on it. Now I get it. You're into the team. Maybe you had a couple pints. You click yes anyway. But I think the interesting thing for this, just like we talked about, is you're developing your app for a particular purpose, and somebody says, wait a minute, we could repurpose it. That's interesting. Like, there are ways to use something. It's kind of like it's a tool, and we can use tools in different ways, and it's not always great. It's not always bad. It's just an interesting thing, and I think it's fascinating to figure out how people feel about their apps or what they think about them once they're created.
Also, the difficult problem of controlling the broadcast like this, which is probably a topic for a different show, but again, they went to great measures to detect this illegal behavior. If this is off the table, how do you protect that broadcast? It's interesting.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what too, because this definitely crosses into other stuff. I mean, we know that any of the large scale media companies have invested a lot to figure out algorithms to determine if somebody's using music illegally, etc. It goes deeper into some of the way that they did this to put it into a binary code that the league can access and then compare against known snippets of binary code, right? Okay, really clever. By the way, then, this wasn't an accident. I mean, this was a very thought out, well-intentioned type of a thing. Oh, but then GDPR comes up, and it turns out, you can't really do that so much under GDPR now. So that's going to be fascinating to see how this works out. By the way, then, doesn't that mean that when we're looking at this stuff now from an application security perspective, right? I've always felt that we've had this duty in security to provide faithful service, which includes, right, the stewardship aspect of our profession is to at least alert other people, right? Alert your general counsel or your executive team to some of these considerations in terms of, yeah, we can do that. I'm not sure if that, like, we could run afoul here, here, or here, and just not always have an opinion on it, right? It's the difference between making a presentation of facts and letting them decide where to go, and grandstanding and trying to sway it to your particular way. And it's going to be curious to see how some of these things go. But as these applications continue to gain prominence, as an application security person, sometimes it's not just looking at the codes and the bugs, but it's looking at intended and unintended usage of the app and considering what the implications could be to you and your organization. In case you didn't have enough stuff to do already.
Right.
Add this little thing onto it.
So, Michael, when we talk about securing the cloud, some will say that we don't have enough skilled people to help us secure and implement the cloud. But
yes,
I think if I understand your points, I think they're valid, right? Because you're like, we really don't have a skills gap. We've got more of a training gap than a skills gap, right? Because there's always going to be new technology. Is it a problem we just can't train people fast enough?
I think the problem is actually simpler. I think it's a communication problem. I don't think we know what we're looking for. How many times have you and I, at least privately, dissected some of these job requirements that are like, so you want someone with 20 years of experience accepting the pay of somebody with no experience and can also, go live in some remote part of the world and be happy? Like, wait, what? And what I find is really kind of fascinating is that when I go work with the teams that don't have a problem, in almost every circumstance, Paul, they know what they're looking for. They know what their work environment entails. They know what their culture is like. They know how that person fits, and they know what they're going to be responsible for. They can fill positions quickly. The people, and by the way, and that's not just big cities. That's all over the world. The people who say, well, I need someone in security, and I'd really like it if they knew how to do development and awareness, and they should also know how to code. If they have red team experience, that'd be great. If they have blue team, that'd be fantastic, and I hope that they've already written some policies. Wait, what? Oh, and, I want to pay them substandard rates because that's all I can afford right now. Those people aren't typically going to be good. So what happens then is we say, oh, well, hold on, then we have the skills shortage. Now, I've had some people argue with me that there's a distinction between the number of bodies and the skill sets that we actually have, and that we do have a skills gap. I don't agree, but what you and I have seen, and I think it's a pretty serious concern, and I've talked to a number of CISOs who have experienced the same. We now have, right, when you and I came up, this wasn't, I couldn't take a computer security class. I don't even think it was offered at where I went. And really, I didn't go the computer engineering route. I didn't computer science route, those things weren't interesting to me. I'm not normal. A lot of the people that we talk to that are CISOs today, same route as you and me, not normal. We fell into this, it works, and that's where we go with it. We were forced to learn as we go. A lot of people now say, hey, I like security. I think it's kind of cool. And most of them say, I want to go learn how to be a pen tester because that's still sexy. Mm-hmm. And they go to college and they get a degree and they've theoretically learned how to pen test. They get a job. They have no keyboard experience. They maybe ran a script. They maybe downloaded Metasploit. But like actually use it, interpret the results, know what to do about it, know how to fix it. Yeah, they're kind of lost. So to go back to your point, is there an opportunity for training? Yeah, I think so entirely. I think that's a huge opportunity. I bristly call it a skills gap. But because the other thing I found, what's interesting is I actually find electricians and auto mechanics make fantastic security people. And I've worked with a number over the last 15 or 20 years that were like, hey, I was working on a hospital stringing lights and I started having to string this Cat5 cable. And I thought, that's interesting. And now, boom, there you go. And they've got very good careers. Why? Right aptitude to curiosity, right understanding of some fundamentals or whatever else. I don't think that we have these gaps that we're all worried about at the level that people have. I know someone right there is screaming, but I can't find. Okay, but en masse, we don't have a big problem. Now, can we do a better job of training people and easing them into the situation? Yeah, that's where you see me get really excited anytime we have these simulation programs or these cyber ranges. If your cyber range allows me to take somebody and do one of two things, I'm instantly hooked. Let me take somebody who knows nothing about it and give them a taste of what's actually going on so they can experience the complexity firsthand. Yes, I love that. The other thing then is take somebody who's interested and let them start working through stuff scenario-based and live-based using real types of data and letting them try their hand and their skills. I can't think of a better way to develop somebody.
Well, and I also think in application development or even application security, right, I kind of feel like we're asking for people with these in-depth skill sets that like just don't exist yet. Like, oh, I want, someone with 5 years experience in Amazon's Fargate. Like,
Right.
dude,
Right.
that was just released like a few months ago. How is that even possible unless you're going to maybe talk to the person that wrote it? Like, they might be the only team in the planet that has maybe 3 years, not even 5 years.
And I want to make sure that they know how to teach other people and they've developed a complete curriculum on how to do it.
It's not feasible, but I think what we're looking for in application development and security, right, is like, have you written something to requirements and released it? The technology doesn't matter. I think what we're looking for is someone that can go learn those technologies, because especially in application development, finding someone with that exact knowledge in that specific vertical, sure, you might come to the conclusion that, hey, there's a skills gap. But I think finding the right person is obviously, Michael, you know, and I've said before, it's not just about what skills they have. It's about their aptitude maybe to learn something and lead a team or whatever.
We go look at the military, we go look at the FBI, we go look at others. They hire for aptitude first and they train for skill second. Yep. And there's times it's felt backwards, but it makes a lot of sense. When I got started on this in the late 90s, I had a guy, I'll make this part quick, and I don't have his permission. I'll just say his name was Bill. Bill was an older guy, like Vietnam era older guy. Actually was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And I remember saying to him sometime, Bill, you're always so calm about this stuff. What gives? He's like, because this is nothing. And he said, here's the thing to learn in life. It's all going to change. Don't worry about learning any of these things to be the only person who knows it. Learn about learning and understand the fundamental concepts. And if you can always apply those, then when something new comes out, you can learn it faster. And then just know at some point that'll go away. Something else will come out. And I don't know. I took it to heart. I mean, I think it's good advice. So I think you're right. I think it's about learning and how we learn and how we adapt. Right? So it's not survival of the fittest, actually. The species that survive are those who adapt the fastest.
Yeah.
That's what security needs to do.
It's interesting. When I was in college and I was looking at where I might want to go, do I want to do the military route? Do I want to go work for the government? I mean, I explored those options. I was curious. And I went to the FBI would come and do recruiting every year at the college I went to. And they're like, yeah, basically we're looking for someone with a degree in accounting. And I'm like, I have a degree in computers. Is that... They're like, no, we're more so looking for people with degrees in accounting. And I'm sure that's changed, right? But
the last time I talked to them, though, they were still looking for accountants and lawyers because, you know, the one thing that's a constant, money.
Yep.
If you know how to follow the money, if you know how to read a ledger, I can teach you computers. I still, and I've maintained that for years in security. If you want to be successful, go look at all the people that we look at and we interview that are successful. What have they figured out? I have to collaborate with other people. I have to meet their needs, right? Sandy Dunn today on Business Security Weekly. We're all in sales. We have to embrace that to some level. And so the FBI and others know that. They know that if you have those basic aptitudes, I can teach you the skills. And I know I mean, can I teach you how to code successfully? No. I accept that there's some art forms in our industry that, you know, can I teach you how to think and be really savvy like a pen tester? No. No. There's some things I can't teach you. I can teach you how to use tool sets, though, all day long. I think that's pretty easy.
Yeah, and so when I hire developers, right, it's nice if you have Python experience, but tell me about a language that you learned and you implemented the project, and what was it? If you can do that, the nice part about some technologies, such as Python, is if you know how to program and you're good at the software development process and implementing requirements and writing test cases, you can move to Python. It's, you know, there you go. And I think we've seen a lot of those different languages that in technologies that come about that you need the fundamentals first.
I still like COBOL, and so you know.
Yeah, well. You could probably get a pretty high-paying job.
It's actually, I was going to say,
right?
That the last I touched code was COBOL, and that's better for everybody that way.
I had an article about shifting left, and certainly I think that's a concept that we're talking about more and more. I feel like, Michael, it's deeper than just shifting left, right? I think it kind of paints a very simplistic picture of, with our security, we should be involved in the beginning of the process. I really think what we're seeing today is just it's part of the entire process. It's not about putting it in any one specific part. That it's just part of the natural life cycle when you take on any kind of activity or project in your organization. That security it's part of it. It almost, to me, if you take shift left to the extreme, it shouldn't get a security label, right? Like, you want to put stuff out and not have as much risk.
And there's your existential threat. Right? So is security something special and we're all special and there's a shortage and gosh, I should get paid more money because I'm really special? Or is security kind of still everybody's responsibility? And I want to shift left, which is what we used to say. I want to bake it in instead of bolt it on later.
Yeah.
And I need to push that power out to the edges. And this is another vector. You see the same thing in cyber insurance. Is cyber its own peril, or is cyber just another? It's part of everything else. Like you can have a fire and you can have a flood, and there could be a cyber incident, whatever else. I'm with you. I think the answer is it just becomes part of the way that we look at and think about things. And I think shift left moves it that way. Now, what's interesting is I've started to notice that shift left means different things to different people. So this is becoming one of those terminologies that if you hear it, please don't just nod your head and go, yeah, we need more of that. Go ask what they're looking for.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Because some people think shift left means security doesn't have any responsibility anymore. I've transferred it all to somebody else and I'm out of it.
No. As we've already established on this show,
I don't think it means that. Yeah.
Like Microsoft still has kernel vulnerabilities. You still need security experts. Like that's not what we're saying. And I'm not in that camp that says, oh, we're not going to have security experts anymore. We're not going to have people who are specialized in security. No, you're still going to have that. But I think we can solve a lot of the problems today and understand risk better and produce, in this case on this show, reliable software. Security is a component of that. There's going to be, that's going to be part of the process. Moving forward more and more.
What I think it does is it changes the role of security, and change is always fearful, but it changes it to more of a governance thing. So can you be there? In fact, I'm always a big fan of the more consultative approach that says, look, we're going to go understand the basics really well, and we're going to understand these fundamental concepts, and we're going to give the power to you. And if you need us to consult with you on how to do that, we'll do it. If you need us to bring you up to level, that's awesome. By the way, here's the minimum things we expect. And here's how we're going to test for them. Here's how we're going to assess as those things were done. And it's not a gotcha. It's not audit. It's governance. It's making sure that the people who need the power have the power. They have the tools they need to be successful. And you're there to support them in that process and then make sure that those things were done. I like that. And that's how we can move at that speed that we want to move at. If we keep thinking that we have to be our own special island and inject it into everybody's process, we will always be the bottleneck, and therefore they will always go around us.
Right. No, I agree.
I'm with you. I agree. That's weird that we agree so much.
What else?
I want to talk about it. It's just kind of interesting. Keith threw it up. The cops are confident iPhone hackers have found a workaround to Apple's new security feature. Without getting into all the details too much, one of the things that's happening in this is why I'm always interested, because I'm curious on the policy side. So the application security side says, Microsoft says, okay, Apple says we're going to build the enclave and we're going to encrypt the data and we're going to make it hard for people to get to. And then there's a number of companies that have said, nope, I have ways to break it. And so now they've come back and they said, oh, you know what? I see a lot of people are using the USB port. They're using the Lightning port and they're connecting to it. So Apple's new plan that they're going to roll out with the new iOS is that if you don't unlock the phone within an hour, the port can only be used for charging. It becomes a one-way port, and they shut it down. And one of the companies said, no, I've already got a way around that. That's all kind of interesting. To me, that's interesting from an application security perspective, because it's not only highly specialized in terms of, hey, we want to build better code, but it's also like, and we're designing it to be hardened and hardenable and to resist these types of attacks, and to resist attacks in a pretty interesting policy perspective. I mean, think like what we've crossed over now is Apple says we're building devices that consumers want. Consumers want to protect their information. We're going to give them what they want. Law enforcement says, I want access to that. And Apple says, well, not mine, man. Not my choice. I think that's an interesting dynamic when we look at the application security of it, because I mean, I think it'd be fun to be on a team building that stuff, but man, the stakes on that, I got to be crazy, no?
Yeah. And I kind of wonder like why Apple hasn't embraced, well, because Apple's Apple, but Apple hasn't embraced some of these companies and said, well, help us figure it out, right? And they don't want to do that because they want to maintain the back door. I think Apple's challenge is to keep that vulnerability and exploit at such a high cost level that it's limited to as small an audience as possible. I don't think they're going to keep everyone out. Like, I just don't. I think the stakes are too high. I think the amount of resources that will be put into solving this problem for people who want access to phones is too much of an incentive. But I think Apple, if they work with the community, can keep that bar pretty high. If they don't, and that bar starts to lower, we're in trouble. Well, iPhone users are in trouble.
You know what I just pulled out of that I like a lot, and I think it bears repeating. A lot of times in security, our job isn't to be perfect. There's if you could find perfect security, fantastic. Serve it up to us. I'd love to see it. But it's to understand what our current needs are. And I think you're right. If we can just keep it so that most people can't do it, those that have additional means and additional access to stuff that might cost them an inordinate amount of stuff, dollars, resources, time, collective wisdom in order to do it, yeah, they're still going to get through. But Apple's probably less concerned about those people and more concerned about more pedestrian and criminal uses against their technology. And their job is just to stay ahead of that. That's an interesting thing to think about, because a lot of times in security, right, it goes back to our conversation of risk tolerance. What's your risk tolerance? What's the problem you're trying to solve? You're not trying to create perfect stuff. You're trying to create something that's tolerable, that gets out there, that solves the problem, that lets people invest their capital into it and use your solution toward the outcome that they want.
Yeah, and in the market side,
I think we lose sight of that a lot, though.
On the market side, on the flip side, I think people in organizations who really care about the security of their phones, I mean, they're getting a different product. Like, they're going to buy a black phone or someone who's specializing in making sure that no one is going to gain
Those
access
are criminals,
to your phone.
right? Because only criminals would use encryption, I think.
Well, it could be criminals. I mean, if you're a criminal, right, wouldn't you probably would go buy a black phone. I mean, I'm sure they're trying to
By the
prevent
way,
against
if you
that.
just see me first, I'm just being facetious.
Yeah, I know you are, but yeah, I mean, sure, criminals are going to try and get a hold of that technology, and it's like the reverse problem, right? Like, the secure phone company is trying to make sure that 98% of their users are legit, knowing that if they can keep criminals at a minimum from getting a hold of their technology, that it's. I mean, Core Security had that problem, right, with software. I mean, they tried to vet and make sure that software didn't fall into the wrong hands. As long as they did a good enough job for that, to keep everyone safe in their strategy, then that was okay. It's like the reverse problem.
And it's fascinating too, but a lot of the folks who develop these tools by day then also support themselves by developing these tools by night for a different group of people. So
that happens.
I've always been a fan of security, not through obscurity, but some level of transparency, and then understanding that there's different economic factors at play, right? There's different levels of friction at play. It's kind of like, you go back to talking about a DES, for example, not triple DES, just single DES. And a trick we used to play on people is we'd say, so is DES broken? People go, yeah. And you go, actually, no, it's just inefficient. The key is 56 bits, right? It's a 64-bit block, and it's a 56-bit key. And giving modern computing technology, you can break it pretty fast. But if the message that you need to send only needs to be protected for those couple seconds, perfectly okay with it.
Right.
It's not a choice most of us make anymore based on what we know and what we've seen. But it doesn't mean that it's a broken technology. It just means that it's no longer adequate for the task. That's a pretty interesting mind shift for us as we look at a lot of this stuff. That's where I get excited about these things.
I don't think I have any other stories that I really was itching to talk about.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did.
I hope I was helpful. And
absolutely.
I don't see the world the way everybody else does. So it's neat to kind of cross over, because I'm not much of a coder, but I do look at the impact that application security's had. That was one of the things I had to get over, Paul, when I was teaching, because I'd have to say, well, wait, I've got to go teach about application security. Well, I'm not a coder. I mean, I can fumble through a PHP script. I can fumble through a Perl script, but that's about it. If you ask me to sit and create one by myself, no thanks.
Oh, I want to talk about this Tapplock story. I don't know if you've been following this, Michael. I'll try and summarize it for our listeners. So Tapplock makes a lock, a physical lock, that you can unlock with, I want to say there was a fingerprint thing on it, but also more so the Bluetooth. So it pairs with your phone Bluetooth, and you can unlock it with your phone. So a couple things happened. One, a while back, someone figured out that if you take apart the lock, if you get it open, that you can bypass the security and trigger it to open. I wasn't too familiar with that research, but someone.
It's also not terribly surprising,
right? And my whole take on that was like, that's not the end of the world. I mean, most locks are vulnerable to some kind of physical attack, right? But a physical attacker physically being there and having to mess with the lock for any given period of time is more time that they're likely to get caught, having some kind of unauthorized access. Still bad, though. The attack that came out recently was that the key to unlock them was very easy to determine. Like, basically the Bluetooth low energy ID.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Was used as part of the seed or the key, I forget which, and basically with some basic software, security researcher figured out you could get these open. Now, recently, it's come out that security researcher, whose name I cannot pronounce, Vangelis Stikis, found that anyone can obtain sensitive information to locate and open the lock simply by pulling the information directly from a leaky company's API server. I mean, now I'm not sure that we would recommend you use these locks, to be quite honest with you. Like, now we've got a series of 3 different attacks that, and to me, what this speaks of is what's the culture of security at this company? You make locks. There should be some kind of culture of security. Looking at these 3 different now vulnerabilities, it tells me you didn't have a security culture.
Do you remember back when we used to give kids lockers in school, and you and I were in school, and we had lockers and we had gym lockers, and at the beginning of the year, you could go to the school store and you'd buy your little combo padlock?
Sure.
You remember if you took your shoelace off and you put it behind it and you spun it really fast, you could pop the cylinders and then the lock would come off?
Yeah, there was a handful of ways. There's the Coke can thing where you can make a shim and pop it open. There was the other thing where if the lock was used enough, you could turn it and figure out what the combination was by feel.
I kind of lump this into that. I mean, depending on what you're locking with it.
True.
If what you're telling me is somebody can use something nifty and they can get into my shed. Now, if I'm using this and I'm expecting it to protect something really valuable and important to me, yeah, okay, then I could see where this would be a little bit of a downside. And to be fair, it's quite possible that I would not personally buy this particular lock. But I've been looking at different smart locks, and I kind of run that own threat model in my head, and I look at it and I go, what's the likelihood a thief is going to somehow decode this lock and waltz right in versus just kick the door frame in?
Yeah.
Most of them are just going to kick the door frame in.
Cut it with a bolt cutter, too.
Right, exactly right. That's exactly right. I think it'd be more stylistic if they had a plasma torch with them, like one of the, little military issue, pop it out and cut it. But, the point to it is, I think these things are interesting. I think they're worth looking at. Like if this is accurate, and I'm assuming it is, but so it's looking at the fact that it's taking the MAC address from the Bluetooth device and it's just hashing with the MD5 plain. That's it. Not salted, not anything else. Just here's the MAC address hashed, and that's your key. Okay, I get where that's come from. Like that's kind of like, whoa, did you guys even think about this to a certain extent? But at the same time, like these aren't. I don't know. To me, I think it's still got to be matched to what it's protecting before we lose our minds over it.
Is this on my locker at the gym or wherever I'm going, rock climbing gym or wherever I'm going, where I might put my valuables for a short period of time? Right. Is the likelihood is pretty low, and what I'm protecting might be pretty low. Like I'm not going to take my $20,000 whatever valuable and put it in the locker while I go to the gym. Most likely, don't do that.
And that's what I was going to say, right? I mean, I think that your use dictates your level of scrutiny over it. So to be able to say, don't buy this lock, that's always kind of concerning to me. Don't buy this lock for what context? Now, you want to come back and say there's 3 different ways to defeat this lock, including the API one, which is a little troublesome to me. Okay, cool. So I get it now. There's not this is going to lock your pool or the shed outside, tops.
Exactly.
It's not, I wouldn't necessarily use it to put a lot more on it. But what I'm also going to point out here is what's interesting to me is now I want to see what the company does as a result, right? They could come out and say, we hate researchers and you guys are all stupid and cry. Or they could say, okay, we've learned that there's a new and a better way to do this, and we really appreciate everybody's help. And now they get more involved with the community and they ask some of these questions. I mean, this would be great to see them now start showing up at the lock-picking villages and stuff and say, all right, we've listened, guys. Show us what we don't know yet.
Yeah.
They'd win us over in a heartbeat.
Well, in the latter 2, the physical attack aside, the software vulnerabilities are conceivably fixable, right? Certainly the open API is easier to fix, right? And even the way they've implemented the lock, conceivably with a software update, they could do that. Now they have to get the users to do the software update, but if you are security conscious, you're probably looking for a software update. Maybe you're reading the email from the company that says, hey, you need to update the software on your lock, and you go do that, and it's much more resilient after the fact, provided, as Michael said, they embrace the security community and actually listen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always the trade-off. I can't remember the name offhand, but there was a company doing this type of lock, smart locks, assignable by radio frequency and such for hotels. and somebody came along and said, hey, for $50 worth of stuff I can buy at Radio Shack, I can break it.
Yep.
You go, okay. Well, no, actually what it means is that you need enough time to get there to dismantle the lock from the outside, connect the leads to the right things, get your homemade generator to work properly, and you had like a 1 in 100 chance of it working properly. And all I can think about is how likely an attack is that versus not. And oh, by the way that they, and I'm not sure this is a great solution, but the way that they offered people to fix it was, here's a cap, stick the cap in, or just glue that port shut, and you're good to go.
Yep.
And I went, right, but people lost their minds over it. And I go, I don't think it's that big an issue because I've been to enough hotel rooms where someone could kick the door in if they wanted to. Like, there's a lot of other vectors that I think are a higher priority than this. And so my concern is always just that we misplace the priority. We look at it and go, but this could happen. And maybe if you're listening to us right now, you're the one who could achieve this and knock this goal out of the park all day long. This is easy for you. It doesn't mean it's actually as easy as we portrayed it to be, and it doesn't mean it's the highest vector that requires the most attention. That's all.
I think physical security, is obviously very different from software security, and the implementation and the goals are kind of different, right? Like, if you're going to force someone to kick the door down, that's going to make a lot of noise. Probably going to deter a bunch of attackers with just making them kick the door down, right? Fences are great. Making someone climb a fence certainly is another limiting factor, slows them down. And the other thing is cameras are awesome, dude. Like, a lot of times with these physical attacks, you just need a sign that says you have a camera, and that's enough for a person to go to the next house. Awesome. Now cameras are so cheap, provided it doesn't have a backdoor to China. But you can find cameras that are cheap today.
I feel like that's a coming segment that I should probably work on with you guys.
Arlo's a great, great system. It has its limitations, but I've got an Arlo that points out in the front of my house. So, and I've got the sign, and I've got a fence, and
I told you I picked up the $20 Wise Cam.
Yeah,
I love it. I just picked up their $40 tilt and pan cam.
It's awesome.
The reality is it's probably sending stuff back to China, but I mean, whatever. If you want to tell me that someone's coming up my front door, that's cool. Send someone over, talk to them.
I do this with my pool, right? Because I've got little ones at home, and like, man, I just make them go. I know I'm not going to prevent my child from getting in the pool. Like, and if you have if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, like, heed the warning. Like, kids are amazing creatures and are going to get into things that you never would expect. And when it comes to a life or death situation with a pool, number one, cause of accidental death in children is drowning. So you look at the statistics and you're like, wow. So, there's multiple gates, there's multiple fences, there's multiple locks. So basically, I'm just slowing my kids down. That is no supplement to watching your kids in the backyard at all times and knowing where your kids are when you have a pool, because you just have to.
Yep, completely agree. And it fits into all of it. So, no, this is always good discussions. Plenty to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you for everyone. Thank you everyone for listening and watching Application Security Weekly. What is Keith's tagline? It's get commit and stay classy. Thanks everyone.